Have you ever heard of La Llorona or the Weeping Woman? From all the stories that I have heard and my understanding, La Llorona or the Weeping Woman seems to be some sort of banshee. The word banshee, if you do not know, loosely translates to woman of the fairy mound or fairy woman. In Irish mythology, a banshee is a female spirit who heralds the death of a family member, usually by wailing, shrieking, or keening. It is a horrible and terrifying sound for those who have lived through the experience. My mother was born in 1952 and lived in the city of Durango, Mexico. When she was around 4, she woke up early one morning to commotion outside as the sun was barely rising. My grandfather had been in the garden with my grandmother and he was yelling at her to go inside as he hid behind a bush and covered his head. My grandma went to my mom, who was awake, and they both covered themselves with my mother's bedspread so that they could not be seen. What had occurred was that in the distance, my grandfather heard the wailing of a woman and saw something white hovering and moving towards their direction. He knew of the legend and stories of misfortune that would come upon you if you laid eyes upon the wraith. My mother chronicles the noise it conjured as some sort of wailing shriek. She told us that the sound was indescribable and not of this world. It's something she can still hear in her memories, traumatizing for a child and a terrible memory for an adult. There are many versions of this legend that have been told. We will explore the tale from my mother's hometown of Durango, Mexico. In the beginning of the 17th century, there lived a woman named Susanna of Leyva. She was a young woman in her early 20s who was of great beauty. During that time, a young man named Gilberto Hernandez arrived in the city of Durango. He was an elegant and handsome man who had come of noble blood from Spain. One day, as he was passing the front of the cathedral, he came upon Susanna. She was the most beautiful woman he had ever laid eyes upon, so he got off his horse and placed his cape on the floor so she could walk over and not get mud on herself. She smiled at him, and as they talked, she was impressed at the mention of his heritage. As time passed and they got to know each other, they formed a bond and a relationship materialized. One day, Susanna asked her father for permission to marry Gilberto, but her father denied her and said that a union with someone of noble blood would never happen. She was then ordered to stay away from Gilberto and never see him again. Sobbing, she asked her father for justification, but he told her that he was not obligated to give her or anyone an explanation, only that she was to follow his orders without question. The girl who was in love gathered her belongings and ran away on a dark and rainy night. On the outskirts of the city, Gilberto built a home for her to live in. As the years went by, they produced 3 children together. The children were, of course, the joy of her life. She asked Gilberto to please marry her so that they could have their father's name, but whenever this occurred, Gilberto would just kiss her and give her a few gold coins before leaving. One Sunday morning, she was present during Mass at the cathedral when the priest made an announcement. The noble Miss Marcela Jimenez would join Don Gilberto Hernandez in holy matrimony in the weeks to follow. When the announcement was made, people turned to look at Susanna. Some stared and some pointed and laughed. Susanna could not believe what she had heard. Leaving the cathedral, she took a coach to Gilberto's home. When she arrived, rather than confronting him, Susanna instead got on her knees and begged him not to leave her and their children who were of his blood. Gilberto looked at her coldly and told her never to show her face again. She was just a peasant from an Indian mother and was an idiot to think she could ever marry someone of high standing. He then proceeded to kick her away, hitting her on the chest with his boot. She stumbled back into the mud, hurt and betrayed in the most painful and humiliating ways. 2 Sundays later, Gilberto and Miss Marcella were at the cathedral happily declaring their vows. As this happened, a very elegant woman walked up to the altar, pretending to wrap their hands in a unity braid. When she was close enough, she stabbed Gilberto multiple times in the chest, then held him in her arms so he could see her face. She then stabbed him in the back a few more times, released him, and Gilberto fell to the floor in a loud thump and covered in blood. In the confusion, the woman ran out of the cathedral and raced back to her home. Knowing that she would be arrested and possibly hanged, Susanna grabbed her children and ran away before she could be taken by the authorities. Not far there was a creek. The authorities were gaining distance. She could hear and see them coming. In her desperation and madness, she slit the throats of her children, dumped the young bodies in the stream, then turned the blade on herself and ran it through her heart. The last thing Susanna saw was the children being carried away by the water as darkness came upon her. The whole city was in mourning at the tragedy that had ensued on that holy day. That night, as the full moon illuminated the sky, in the distance the sound of a woman weeping was heard running down the street where Susanna had lived. The woman was heard sobbing for her children. Thank you for listening to today's story. Please don't forget to share, subscribe, and hit the like button. If you would like to contribute your own encounter or story, please contact me at the email below. Thank you, and keep an open mind, for there are things out there that are yet to be understood.